Franklin Pierce, that's not a toy. Frank shouted as his 5-year-old son Liam launched a rusted wrench across the auto shop floor. It clanged against the concrete, narrowly missing the tire of a dusty old Toyota. You want to give your old man a heart attack. Liam giggled, clearly unbothered. I was fixing it, Daddy. Frank sighed and wiped his grease-covered hands on a red shop towel. You and me both, kid. The shop smelled like oil, coffee, and desperation. Business had been slower than usual for mid-March. Frank had been patching tires and replacing brake pads for half the usual rate just to keep the lights on. Between the rent, daycare for Liam, and his pickup's dying transmission, he was barely hanging on. The bell above the garage door jingled. Frank turned, expecting another oil change or maybe a tire rotation. But instead, in walked a woman who didn't look like she belonged anywhere near a grease pit. She was wearing a camel-colored coat, cream turtleneck, jeans that probably cost more than all 4 of Frank's tires combined, and heels that clicked sharply on the concrete. She looked panicked. Hi, sorry, I know this isn't a jewelry store or anything, but I think I dropped my ring somewhere around here. I was getting gas next door, and I think it slipped off when took my gloves off. Frank blinked. Okay, what kind of ring? A diamond ring, she said quickly, brushing her chestnut hair out of her face. Small, platinum band, family heirloom, my grandmother's. Frank glanced toward Liam, who was now playing with a deflated soccer ball. Liam, stay right there, okay? Yes, Daddy. Frank turned back to the woman. All right, let's retrace your steps. She followed him outside, scanning the pavement like her life depended on it. Her hands were trembling. You sure it's not in your bag or car? Frank asked, kneeling to check under the edge of the curb. I already tore everything apart, twice. He looked up at her. We'll find it, what's your name? Presley, she answered, then hesitated. Presley Alden. Frank nodded. Frank, and that little wild one back there is Liam. She offered a tight smile, but her eyes were still scanning every inch of concrete like she was going to cry. They searched for 20 minutes along the curb, near the gas station, even inside the gutter. Frank was about to give up when something caught the sunlight near the storm drain. Hey, hold up, he said, crouching down. He reached into the edge of the grate, arm deep in muck and God knows what from the street runoff. And then his fingers brushed metal. He pulled it out, wiped it off, and held it up. Is this it? Presley gasped. Oh my God, yes. She reached for it, then paused. You just reached into a storm drain. Yes, well, Frank grinned. Couldn't let your grandma haunt me over a lost ring. Presley looked at him a second longer than necessary, then carefully took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. Thank you. Seriously, you didn't have to help. Frank shrugged. You looked like you were about to cry, and I have a soft spot for women about to cry. She laughed softly, brushing at her cheek. You stopped that. He nodded toward her car. You good to drive? Yes, I was just heading to a meeting downtown, but can I do something for you, pay you, tip you? Frank waved it off. Nah, you don't owe me anything. Frank, she said, stepping closer, I don't normally lose my cool like that. I'm usually the one fixing problems, not causing them. He raised a brow. You look like someone who doesn't lose much at all. She tilted her head, a curious smile forming. You'd be surprised. Before either of them could say anything else, Liam came running out, soccer ball in hand. Daddy, I'm hungry. Presley looked from Liam to Frank. I don't know if this is weird, but dinner's on me tonight for both of you, wherever you want. Just my way of saying thank you. Frank hesitated. You don't have to. I want to. He looked down at Liam, then back at her. All right, far be it from me to turn down free food. Presley's smile widened. Great, I'll pick you up at 6. Frank blinked. You're serious? Very, she gave him a quick wink. And don't worry, I'm not gonna make you wear a suit, but maybe wash the grease off. That night, she showed up in a sleek black car Frank couldn't name, but knew cost more than his entire life. She opened the passenger door like it was no big deal, and Frank helped Liam into the booster seat she'd somehow already installed. You came prepared, he said. I like being prepared. They drove to a steakhouse with white tablecloths and waiters who pronounced the wine list like it was French poetry. Frank had never felt more out of place in his life, but Presley, she fit. What surprised him was how she kept checking on Liam, asking him questions about school and dinosaurs. She wasn't just throwing money around, she was paying attention. When dessert came, Presley leaned toward Frank and whispered, "You're a good dad." He looked at her, caught off guard. "I'm just trying not to screw him up too much." "You're doing better than most." That night, after she dropped them back at the shop, Presley walked Frank and Liam to the door. "I had a great time," she said softly. "So did we." She looked at him like she wanted to say more, but wasn't sure if she should. Then Liam, completely unaware, tugged Frank's hand and said, "Daddy, is she your girlfriend now?" Frank turned beet red. Presley laughed. "Guess that means I need to ask you on a second dinner." And Frank, who hadn't had a real date in over 4 years, nodded. Yes, I'd like that." As she walked back to her car, Frank watched her go, something twisting in his chest. She was beautiful, she was kind, and clearly she came from money. But what he didn't know yet was just how much. Frank paced behind the auto shop late the next afternoon, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his faded jeans as he kept glancing toward the street. It wasn't like he was counting the minutes until 6. Except he absolutely was. Liam was inside with his daycare sitter, Nora, who agreed to stay a little later for some extra cash. Frank had installed a small TV in the corner of the break room and left Liam with animal crackers, a juice box, and strict instructions not to touch anything that looked remotely dangerous. The hum of an engine pulled Frank's attention to the curb. A sleek gray coupe slowed to a stop, and Presley stepped out in a navy blouse tucked into tailored pants, her hair swept back, gold hoops catching the light. She wasn't dressed for a date, more like she'd come straight from closing a deal. "You sure you're not a lawyer?" Frank asked as she approached. She laughed, locking the car behind her. "Not even close." He tilted his head. "Then what is it you do?" "I run a development firm, commercial properties mostly. Office buildings, luxury apartments, urban restoration, that sort of thing." Frank blinked. "You build cities." "Pieces of them." He whistled under his breath. "Well, damn." Presley raised an eyebrow. "Still want to grab that burger?" He grinned. "Lead the way, city builder." They ended up at a retro diner about 15 minutes away, red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and a jukebox that hadn't played anything newer than 1989. Presley slid into the booth without hesitation and ordered a milkshake with her burger like it was the most normal thing in the world. Frank watched her as she stirred her straw through the whipped cream. "You get a lot of guys helping you find lost jewelry." She smiled without looking up. "No, most people walk past or offer to call someone. You jumped into a storm drain." "I've done worse for less," he said, then paused. "Okay, maybe not less." Her eyes flicked up then, curious. "What's the worst you've done?" Frank leaned back, climbed onto the roof of a moving truck because a friend swore he heard a loose bolt. Turned out it was a soda can rolling around in the back. Presley covered her mouth as she laughed. "That's either brave or really dumb." "Bit of both," he said with a shrug, "but you strike me as someone who plays it safe." Presley's expression shifted. "I used to, not so much anymore." Frank leaned in, elbows on the table. "What changed?" She stirred her milkshake again, slower this time. My father passed away last year. Suddenly. Stroke. He ran the company before me, always had a plan, always had backup plans for the backup plans. I took over thinking I'd follow his blueprint, but nothing's gone according to it. Frank's brow furrowed. That why you were so upset about the ring? Presley nodded. It was the last thing he gave me. I wore it to feel like he was still here. Losing it felt like losing the last piece of him. Frank didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, quietly, I lost my dad when I was 20. Car accident. Never saw it coming. She looked up. How'd you handle it? Didn't, he said bluntly. Not at first. Drank too much and stopped answering my phone. Eventually figured out that wasn't helping anyone, especially not my mom. Presley studied him for a long beat. You're more than a mechanic, you know. Frank gave a half smile. And you're more than a woman who drops expensive jewelry at gas stations. Their food arrived, breaking the tension. Conversations shifted, lighter now movies they'd both liked, the weirdest customers they'd ever dealt with, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Presley argued it did. Frank called it a crime against dough. As they finished, Presley glanced toward the window. The sun had dipped low, streaking the sky in orange and lavender. I don't usually do this, she said, wrapping the last of her fries in a napkin. Eat burgers with grease monkeys, Frank teased. Go out with someone who doesn't know my last name means something in this city. Frank's smile faded slightly. Yes, I picked up on that. Alden, as in Alden Tower and Alden Plaza, and that massive glass building near the courthouse. She nodded. That's us. He exhaled. So you're not just successful, you're loaded. I prefer resourceful, she said with a soft smile. But yes, have more than I need. Frank leaned back, watching her. And yet you're sitting here, in a diner, with a man who lives in a rental above his shop and keeps spare change in a coffee can. I'm here, Presley said, because you didn't ask for anything. You didn't change when you realized who I was. You've been honest with me from the first second. He looked down at his hands. That's all I've got, Presley. Honesty and busted knuckles. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. That might be more than most men I've dated. They walked back to her car in silence, the air crisp now, headlights from passing cars streaking the sidewalk. At the driver's side door, Presley turned to him. I don't know where this is going, she said. I don't have a 5-year plan for it, but I like seeing you. I like how I feel around you. Frank rubbed the back of his neck. You're probably used to guys who wear cufflinks and talk about investments. And you're probably used to women who don't show up in imported cars and offer to buy dinner. He gave a low laugh. Got me there. She stepped closer, her voice softer. So what do we do about this? Frank met her eyes. We take it one day at a time, and maybe next time cook. Presley's smile widened. You cook. Only on days that end in Y. She leaned in and pressed a kiss to his cheek, then slid into her car. As she drove away, Frank stood on the sidewalk, heart thumping in a way it hadn't since before Liam was born. Something real was starting. And he had a feeling it would change everything. Frank stood at the stove with an oven mitt on one hand and a wooden spoon in the other, squinting at a pot of bubbling marinara like it might explode. Presley was due in 20 minutes. Liam was fed and watching cartoons in the corner of the small apartment above the shop, and Frank had spent the past hour trying to make up for the fact that he owned exactly 4 forks and 0 wine glasses. He'd shaved twice, changed his shirt 3 times, and finally settled on a navy button-down with sleeves rolled to his elbows. The apartment still smelled faintly of motor oil, no matter how many apple-scented candles he'd lit. But the sauce was homemade, and the pasta wasn't from a box this time. That had to count for something. He checked the time again. Presley was never late. A knock came at the door, and Frank wiped his hands on a dish towel before opening it. She stood there in a soft, dove-gray sweater and black pants, holding a bottle of red wine and a paper bag. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her hair was loosely pinned back, a few strands falling around her face. "Hope you weren't planning on dessert," she said, lifting the bag. "Because I brought enough cannoli to make us both regret our life choices." Frank chuckled and stepped aside. "Come on in. Just ignore the fire hazard level wiring near the toaster." Presley's eyes swept the apartment, not judgmental, just curious. "It's cozy." "It's small," Frank corrected. "But the walls don't leak, and the landlord hasn't raised rent in 2 years, so I'm not complaining." She set the wine and bag on the counter. "Something smells amazing." "I've got 3 specialties," Frank said, lifting the lid on the pot. "This is number 2, number 1 is grilled cheese, number 3 is cereal." Presley leaned in, inhaling. "Your number 2 is better than most people's number 1. Flattery will get you seconds." They ate at the small kitchen table, knees brushing under the wood. Liam had already crashed on the couch, and Nora would be by in an hour to pick him up. Presley listened as Frank told a story about a customer who tried to pay for an alternator replacement with a gift card to a seafood buffet. She laughed, covering her mouth with her napkin, and Frank felt something settle in his chest. Like the air between them had shifted. Presley reached for her wine, then paused. "You know what I was thinking about today? Whether this sauce needed more salt." She gave him a look. "I was thinking about how rare it is to sit with someone and not feel like I'm being weighed." "Weighed?" "Measured, judged, sized up for what I can offer them. Most people want something from me. Information, favors, access." Frank leaned back. "And what do you want?" She met his gaze. "Something real, something that doesn't come with a contract or an agenda." Frank studied her, the candlelight from the table flickering across her features. "You think I'm that?" "I think you're the first man I've met in a long time who isn't trying to impress me. And that's the most impressive thing of all." Frank looked down at his half-eaten plate. "I'm not sure I've got anything left to impress with." Presley reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "You're raising a kid on your own, running a business with duct tape and determination, and somehow still made a killer marinara. That's not nothing." He turned his hand, lacing their fingers. "You ever think maybe you deserve someone who can give you more?" "I've already had more," she said quietly. "Boardroom dinners, private jets, men who called me beautiful and ordered for me in the same breath. I'm not interested in more. I'm interested in better." Frank didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He just looked at her, really looked, and realized he didn't want the night to end. Presley stood, gathering the plates. "Let me clean up." "You cooked, I clean." "You sure?" "I'm not letting a guest do dishes in my apartment. That's against some moral code." She smiled and handed him her plate. "All right, but I'm putting the cannoli on a plate at least." While Frank rinsed the dishes, Presley unpacked the dessert and set them on the counter. "So," she said, leaning against the fridge, "I have a work event tomorrow night." He glanced over. "Fancy kind?" "Black tie, charity auction. I usually go alone, but I thought," she hesitated, "maybe you'd come with me." Frank paused mid-scrub. "Me, in a tux?" "There's a rental place I trust. I'll cover it, you'd look great in one." He dried his hands, turning to face her. "You sure you want me there? In your world?" "I do, because I want to see what it's like to have someone by my side who doesn't care about the cameras or the money." Frank nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm warning you now, I don't know the first thing about wine pairings or which fork to use." "I'll teach you." "And what do if someone tries to talk stocks with me?" Smile, nod, and redirect to classic cars. He chuckled. "Deal." Presley stepped closer, her voice softer now. There's something else I should tell you. Frank tilted his head. Good or bad? She hesitated. Important. My company is being targeted. Someone's trying to undermine a major deal I've been working on for months. I don't know who, but it's starting to bleed into everything. My name, my reputation, and if it gets worse. Frank's voice was steady. Why are you telling me this? Because it might follow me, and I didn't want to bring you into something messy without telling you. Frank didn't flinch. I've lived in messy. I can handle messy. You don't even know the half of it. Then tell me. Presley looked at him, eyes suddenly vulnerable. There's a man who used to work for us. He wanted my position after my father died. When he didn't get it, he left, started his own firm, and he's been trying to take me down ever since. You think he's behind what's happening? I do, but I can't prove anything yet. Frank stepped forward, closing the space between them. You're not alone in this. You don't even know what you're promising. I'm not promising anything, can't back up. Presley searched his face like she was trying to find the catch, but there wasn't one. Frank didn't know the first thing about hostile takeovers or corporate sabotage, but he knew how to stand by someone when things got hard. She reached up slowly, brushing a hand along his jaw. You're not what I expected. He leaned down, their foreheads nearly touching. Neither are you. And when their lips met, nothing about it was tentative. It was grounded and certain, like two people who'd already faced the fire and weren't afraid of what came next. Outside, the city buzzed, but inside that small apartment above the auto shop, something stronger than comfort was forming. Something that could weather the storm. They just didn't know yet how close that storm really was. The ballroom glittered like a dream. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in gold, and every table was dressed in ivory linens and towering centerpieces of white orchids and pale roses. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in floor-length gowns drifted through the space like it was their natural habitat. Glasses of champagne balanced effortlessly in manicured hands. Frank adjusted the collar of his crisp black tuxedo, feeling like someone had squeezed him into another man's skin. Presley stood beside him in an emerald satin gown that shimmered with each step, her hair swept into a style that made her look even more like the kind of woman who belonged in this world. She kept her hand lightly on his arm, anchoring him. You good? She asked quietly. Frank nodded once, just counting how many forks I'm not supposed to touch. Presley leaned in, her voice touched with amusement. Start from the outside and work in. You'll be fine. Frank scanned the crowd. This is the kind of place where someone offers you a business card before they tell you their name. Probably because their name doesn't impress anyone, she replied, but their title will. A man in a midnight blue tuxedo approached, his sharp features arranged in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Presley, always the most radiant woman in the room. Presley's posture changed subtly, not stiff but alert. Graham. The man's gaze slid to Frank. And this must be your date. Frank offered his hand. Frank Pierce. Of course, Graham said, shaking it too tightly. I've heard, quite a bit. I doubt that, Frank replied evenly, but I'm happy to disappoint. Presley stepped in. Is there something you need, Graham? Only to wish you luck tonight. Here your pitch for the Midville District project is the final one on the docket. He gave a theatrical sigh. I do hope the committee finds it refreshing. Presley's expression didn't shift. They're interested in substance, not theatrics. Graham's smile sharpened. We'll see. As he walked away, Frank leaned closer. That him? She nodded. Graham Latimer. He was my father's protege, until he decided he deserved the crown. Frank looked around the room, the glimmering wealth, the curated elegance, the power shifting beneath the surface like a tide. You sure you want me in the middle of this? Presley's fingers tightened slightly on his arm. You're the only thing keeping me grounded tonight. The event unfolded with practiced precision. Speeches, applause, a string quartet playing something elegant that Frank couldn't name. Then came the charity auction, where Presley's firm had donated a week's stay at one of their luxury developments in Santorini. It sold for $20,000 to a woman in a sequin cape. But as the night wore on, tension began to crackle beneath the surface. Whispers floated between clusters of guests. Presley's name was being passed from mouth to mouth, always with a glance toward the stage. Frank leaned in toward her. Something's happening. She was already checking her phone, her jaw tight. He leaked something, I don't know what yet. A tall woman with a headset approached. MS, Alden, they've moved your pitch up. You're next. Presley stood, spine straight. Thank you. Frank touched her hand. You don't have to do this alone. I won't, she said. Just sit where I can see you. She walked onto the stage with the grace of someone born to command a room. But as the screen lit behind her, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Frank turned toward the projection. Across the screen flashed images of architectural renderings, then suddenly, documents. Emails, financial spreadsheets. One particular slide labeled Internal Reallocation Proposal sent a wave of confusion through the room. Presley stopped mid-sentence. The screen flickered again. A red stamp appeared across one document, misappropriation of funds. Gasps, whispers, then silence. Presley stepped forward. These are not part of my presentation. Someone has accessed confidential files and manipulated them. A voice called out, is this a sign of instability in the Alden group? Presley didn't flinch. It's a sign that someone is trying very hard to keep us from revitalizing Midville. Graham stood near the rear of the room, arms folded, a look of perfect innocence on his face. Frank was already moving. He slipped out of the ballroom and into the hallway, finding a staff member carrying a tray of wine glasses. The tech booth, where is it? End of the hall, through the double doors. Frank didn't hesitate. He pushed through, finding a young man at a laptop, pale and sweating. Did someone give you new slides? Frank demanded. The tech stammered. A guy came in earlier, said he was with the Alden team, gave me a flash drive. Frank grabbed the drive from the port and stormed back into the ballroom, straight to the stage. Presley looked up, startled, as Frank held the flash drive out to the event director. This was used to hijack her presentation, not her files. The director took it, frowning. We'll verify that immediately. Frank turned to the crowd. This woman has rebuilt neighborhoods. She doesn't need to sabotage anyone to earn trust, but someone else clearly does. All eyes turned to Graham. Presley's voice rang out, calm but firm. I've always believed in building something that lasts, not just in concrete and steel, but in trust. Tonight, someone tried to fracture that foundation, but the truth doesn't need stagecraft. The crowd erupted in applause. Later, after the dust had settled and the flash drive was handed over to authorities, Presley stepped onto the rooftop terrace with Frank. The city stretched around them, glittering and endless. They'll investigate, she said. It's not over, but it's a start. Frank looked out over the skyline. You held your ground, you didn't blink. I almost did, she admitted, but then you stood up, and I remembered why I keep fighting. He turned to her. You know this doesn't scare me off, right? The suits, the scandals, the skyscrapers. I didn't fall for any of that. She stepped closer. Then what did you fall for? The woman who cried over a ring, laughed with my son, and never once looked down on me. Presley's eyes softened. Frank Pierce, you walked into my world without changing a thing about yourself, and somehow you changed everything. He cupped her cheek, his voice low. I love you. She didn't hesitate. I love you too. From behind them, Liam's voice rang out. Nora had brought him for the last hour. "Daddy, are you gonna marry her?" Presley laughed, turning to him. "What do you think, Liam?" Liam nodded solemnly. "You make him smile different." Frank knelt beside his son. "How would you feel about having a second bedtime enforcer?" Liam grinned. "Only if she makes pancakes." Presley bent down. "Deal." Months later, beneath a canopy of white lights strung across the rooftop of a restored Midville building her first completed project after the scandal broke, Presley walked down the aisle in a simple gown. No heels this time, just barefoot on the stone. Frank waited in a tailored suit, Liam standing between them holding a ring box. There were no reporters, no board members, just a mechanic, a millionaire, and a boy who believed in pancakes and second chances. And when Frank kissed his bride, the city that once seemed too big, too far out of reach, finally felt like home. The first time Frank stepped into the foyer of the Midville building as its official co-owner, his boots left faint prints on the polished marble, and his heart pounded like he'd stepped onto another planet. "Frank," Presley said, appearing beside him, her heels quiet against the floor, "breathe. You're not being sentenced. You're becoming a partner." He looked at her, then glanced around at the sweeping staircase, the sun catching on the glass walls, and the quiet buzz of the front desk, where a concierge smiled politely at them both. "I don't think I've ever been in a building where the air smells like money." Presley leaned in. "That's eucalyptus and sandalwood. We have a diffuser in the lobby." He gave a short laugh. "Of course you do." She handed him a slim envelope. Inside was a certificate, framed in dark leather, naming him partial owner and operations lead of the Midville Restoration Project. "Your name's on the deed now, not just mine." His brows pulled together. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said, her voice firm but warm. "You built this with me, not with blueprints, with grit, with loyalty, with the kind of foundation no contractor could ever lay." Frank looked down at the certificate, then at her. "You know this still feels like a dream, right?" "Then it's a good one," Presley said, threading her fingers through his, "and we're wide awake." Outside the building, reporters waited, not for a scandal, but for a celebration. Since Graham's arrest for corporate sabotage, Presley's name had become synonymous with resilience. Her company didn't just survive the attack, it flourished. Investors rallied, the board stood behind her, and the Midville project became a symbol of renewal in the city's oldest district. Frank hadn't wanted attention, but when Presley asked him to stand beside her at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he didn't hesitate. As the red silk ribbon fluttered to the ground beneath the weight of oversized golden scissors, the crowd erupted into applause. Liam clapped the loudest, perched on Nora's hip, proudly wearing a tiny hard hat that read Junior Builder. Afterward, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Presley pulled Frank into one of the newly furnished rooftop units, the one she'd quietly reserved for them. He stepped inside, eyes sweeping the open space high ceilings, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the skyline. "This is ours," he asked, his voice low. She nodded. "Figured you deserved a place with a working oven and a view." He turned slowly, taking it in. "And what happens to the apartment above the shop?" Presley smiled. "We keep it, for weekend pancakes and when Liam wants to feel like he's camping." Frank walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "You really think I belong here?" "I don't think it," she said, coming up behind him. "I know it. You belong wherever I am, and I belong with you." He turned to her, pulling her close. "You never asked for a ring." "I didn't need one." "But you're getting one," he said, reaching into his pocket. The box was simple. No velvet, no fanfare. Just a gold band with a diamond she could wear every day. Something solid, something real. Presley stared at it, then at him. I didn't want to wait, he said. Not another day, not another hour. I want you as my wife. She didn't answer. She just took the ring, slid it on, and kissed him so deeply the city seemed to blur behind them. They married quietly at a botanical garden just outside the city. No press, no gala, just close friends, family, and vows exchanged beneath a canopy of white blossoms. Liam wore a bow tie and passed out tissues to anyone crying, which included Frank, though he denied it thoroughly. Presley wore a dress without a train, no veil, just her hair loose and her heart wide open. Frank kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. They didn't take a private jet to their honeymoon. They took Frank's rebuilt pickup truck, drove along the coast, stayed in inns with creaky floors and breakfast buffets, and slow danced in parking lots whenever the mood struck. Back in the city, life found its rhythm. Frank opened a second garage, this one staffed with apprentices from the local trade school. He taught them everything he knew, and then some. Presley continued to expand her firm, but she made it a rule to be home for dinner 3 nights a week, and Sunday mornings were reserved for pancakes, cartoons, and no cell phones. Liam started first grade that fall. He told his teacher he wanted to be a builder like Mommy and Daddy. Frank had to step out of the classroom to collect himself. They celebrated their first anniversary on the rooftop of the Midville building, the same place they'd stood during the worst night of Presley's career. This time, there was no chaos, just candlelight, soft music, and the city below them. Presley leaned against him as the wind played with her hair. Do you ever think about how it started? I try not to, Frank said with a grin. I was covered in grease, and you were losing your mind over a ring. She laughed, and now? Now I've got everything I never thought I'd have, he said. A wife, a family, a life that feels like it's finally mine. She touched his face. You gave me more than a second chance. You reminded me what it means to fight for something real. Frank pulled her close, their foreheads touching. You gave me a reason to believe was worth more than what I could fix with my hands. The city lights glowed around them. They didn't need grand declarations anymore. They had each other. They had love. And finally, they had forever.